Hello, everybody. This is Mike here, and you're listening to the All Metal Mode podcast. Tonight, it's me along with Mr. Dorian Cook. And boy, if you tune in tonight, you're going to catch, I think, a really good and helpful show tonight. Tonight, we're going to talk about research, and hopefully some of you, I think we're going to come across some stuff that some of you have never thought of or done. And some of it you may be, I know you will, but a lot of people I find don't take advantage of it and stuff. So we're going to get into that tonight. And then at the end, Dorian is going to give up a bunch of leads that he's collected, or not all of them or anything, but some of the leads he's collected over the years that he knows he's not going to get to. Isn't that right, Dorian? Isn't that what you're mostly sharing, stuff you know you won't get to?
Yeah, I've assembled what I call a lead book. It's a big 3-ring notebook with copies of pages of books that have leads on them, and primarily out of the official records. And I've just reached a point in life where I'm kind of getting ready to start the last lap of the race. And man, I need another lifetime to go through all the leads I've already got. So I would rather, share those and at least have the pleasure of knowing that I gave some people some great hunts.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, before we get started, there was something that you wanted to do.
We kind of got a little tradition going. I say we. I think Bill Marsh is primarily responsible. He always insists that I tell a true treasure story at the end of each show. So I thought, we've been giving him all this free ride here for over several shows, Mike. I thought it was time that the boy earned his supper, so to speak. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to toss out a riddle for Bill. And he has to put an explanation of exactly what it means in chat by the end of the show to get his treasure story. No answer, no treasure story. So here it is. I hope he's ready. Now, don't the rest of you folks don't cheat and give him the answer, because some of you will pick it up. But we'll just see how nimble Bill's mind is at this point in life. And here is the riddle. A termite walks into a bar, and he looks around the room, and then he hollers out in a voice loud enough for everybody to hear, "Is the bartender here?" So that's it, Bill. You got to figure out what that means.
Hold on. Do that one more time.
Termite walks into a bar, looks all around the bar, yells out in a voice loud enough for everybody to hear, "Is the bartender here?"
Huh.
Why did he do that?
I'm curious to see what comes of that.
Yep. Oh, some of the listeners will get it, but it takes a while.
Oh boy.
Okay. If he hasn't got it towards the end of the show, I'll give him a hint.
Everybody's going, what?
Okay. All right, Mike, you ready to get us started?
Well, you were going to tell us about your weekend as well. I want to hear about that.
Okay. Well, we had in our We Dig the Civil War relic hunting and Civil War history group, we were able to finally have our very first event. We had a meeting of 6 of us, including myself, up in Indianapolis on this past Sunday. And I was able to have a 40-year-long, it's been 40 years since I've seen my good old relic hunting buddy Lee Sanzo, who's in our group. Lee is one of those guys who's been there, done that. He is, as far as I'm concerned, one of the legends in metal detecting now. And I had not seen the man in 40 years. And we had a wonderful reunion. We picked up right where we left off. We used to hunt the battlefields in Louisiana and other places together, and then life just separated us and took us in different directions. So that was a high point for me. But we also had Larry and Diane Smith, and boy, that was a great part of the event too. Larry and Diane are really experienced detectorists. I think Diane told me she's been metal detecting about 20 years, and she brought two display cases of really amazing artifacts and coins that she's found in the UK. They've made several trips over there, or maybe more than several. Several is probably not the right word. They've made a dozen or more, I believe. But boy, have they found the stuff. You know, they had me champing at the bit to jump on a plane and head for the UK. And then we had Mike Fuson, the co-publisher of Dirt Digest magazine, and Mike and I finally got to look each other in the eye. And I was telling Mike Hare, I said, "Hey, man, I came home with a Dirt Digest T-shirt, a spray bottle, and a bumper sticker, and I didn't even have to enter a contest." So Mike, it turned out, would end up being the hero of the day, because I did a very dumb thing, and all the excitement, and we were all talking a mile a minute and sharing stories, and Lee was rattling off stories that would just blow your mind, one after another, like a machine gun. And at the end, you know, we were just, everybody was on an emotional high. It was just a wonderful experience. And we were back in a corner. We had a big round table, kind of away from everybody else there. We met in an Olive Garden restaurant there in Indianapolis, and I had brought a huge album of coins and tokens, things that I'd found, and as well as several small display Riker cases of artifacts, Civil War, pre-Civil War, Spanish, things that nobody has seen. I've not posted any pictures, and my digital camera was in this bag that I had all this in too. And when we got up and left, I left that bag there in the restaurant, and it had several $1,000s worth of coins and artifacts. I won't tell you exactly how much, but it was enough. When I got home and realized I didn't have that bag, and it was too late to call the restaurant, I had a rough night. Thankfully, at 11 o'clock the next day, I called the restaurant, and the manager said they had the bags. And Mike Fuson only lives about a little less than 30 miles away. And out of the goodness of his heart, man, he drove down there and secured that bag. So it's now residing in his gun safe until we get a break in the weather. Then I've told Mike, you know, come on down, we'll go hunting, and you can just bring that stuff with you when you come. So that's how the adventure ended. It was absolutely picture perfect until I did a stupid thing, an old man trick, and went off and left that bag. But it ended well, so I'm very, very grateful.
Yeah, that's so good. When you started to tell me that, it absolutely just made my heart sink. Scared me, but what a good outcome. And thank you, Mr. Fuson. Gosh, I can't say I am horrible at names.
I think we ought to just call him. I think we ought to just call him Nuclear Fission and let it go.
There you go, fusion. I could do that. Yeah, and thank you, sir, for going and picking that up. And what a great guy, Mike's such a wasn't. I haven't even met Mike, but I love talking on the phone with him and stuff. He's such a good guy. Speaking of Mike, I just wrapped up the magazine today. I got it to him and Craig. Of course, there might be some minor changes, but it should be out Sunday. And there are some great articles. There's one that's really funny that I still chuckle over. But then I think there's some really good information this month, some really good submissions, and a couple articles that are a little bit different than maybe what we're used to, but really good articles. And so that should be out Sunday as long as Craig can get it out. So we're 10 minutes in. I think we got a pretty big show tonight, so we'll get started on it. And tonight's, how the topic is how to research like the pros, and we're just going to start it off, and we're going to kind of, I think, give you a few examples of each one, and then at the end of the show, Dorian's going to go into some leads, and I think even where he got most of those leads and stuff. And so let's get started. One thing that I have found in every single town I've visited or lived in is local historians. And I think that is an absolute amazing person to get a hold of. If you can hunt that person down, there is somebody, I don't care how small your town is, that is passionate about the local history. Years ago, the small town I lived in, I was at the library, and there was a younger lady, I want to say, mid-30s, and they're doing some research, and we were both in I forget what the room was called. We were at the county library. It's where all the maps and I know that there were some unique things in there, but we'll get into that a little bit later because I'm going to discuss that later. But even though I had done extensive research on the local area, she started rattling off stuff to me that I had never heard, and she gave me several leads. One including an old park that had quit being used early, like 20s or 30s at the latest. It might even been earlier than that. Unfortunately, that was on state land I couldn't get to, but she, some of the places I even knew, but she shared history with me about those places I didn't know. And I've talked to other people that have gotten some really great leads from local historians, and I think they are a wealth of information. And if you can find that person, that can be a huge thing for you. And you're going to hear things probably, like I said, that others, that you knew about, but, and I can't quite remember what it was. There was an old, one was a church, a really old church. But something I didn't know that she knew about it was that before there was even a church there, they would have, like, I guess you'd call revivals there, like tent revivals. And, things like that. She had told me about another revival that never turned into a church. It was actually a field where they would do it at. And we're talking, it's been a good bit, but I want to say early 1800s, mid 1800s. She gave me so many, those come to mind, but the local historian, that person that just loves history of the area, is absolutely fantastic. I'm going to jump around here a little bit, Dorian, because I should have put these a little bit better in order if I was going to do that. Another one is historical societies. And,
hey, Mike, excuse me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Before you get into that, can I add a comment on that revival thing you were talking about?
Go ahead.
Keep in mind on the old time revivals, that we're talking about in the 1800s, late 1800s, when they passed the plate, most of what went into it from those poor people that came to those meetings was change, coins. So, those older revival sites can be really coin bonanzas. Because, human beings are human beings, and offering plates got dropped, coins got scattered in the grass that the chairs were on and stuff like that, and things got lost. I know from experience that those older revival sites usually are better coin sites than the newer revival sites, because usually what goes in the offering plate is currency.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure. Yeah. And I've come across a handful of those over the years. And, another is, I haven't done it, but I know of a guy who looks for, just similar, it's a little off the topic, old picnic groves. And I know he'll hit even sometimes several in a row that really don't produce, but boy, when he finds one that produces, it's huge. But that's a good point, Dorian. Like I said, I'm gonna skip around
picnic groves. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also,
go ahead.
Mike, you might want to throw in the picnic groves, carnival sites. Carnivals would come and set up on the outskirts of these smaller towns. And I know down there when I lived in Texas, a farmer told me, he said the carnival used to set up in my pasture between those two rows of trees. And he let a guy hunt it, and that guy pulled 6,000 coins out of that grass between those two rows of trees.
Mm. Wow. That's incredible. The last town I lived in Ohio, there was actually, I'd come across where there was same thing, a carnival set up. Unfortunately, it was all built up. I mean, an area where the yards were smaller than the yards were smaller than the houses. And,
yeah.
But boy, I've never come across one of those, but, yeah. So the next one is historical societies. I think a lot of people are scared of it, and I've heard the advice, don't tell them that you metal detect, but I know people who have gone, including myself, and said I metal detect and had people come up, and not only were they accepting, but giving me leads, telling me about their place, what was on their property, and I've gotten places to detect that way. You all remember Trucker Bob, who started the podcast with me a couple years, those that have been around a long time. He went to an old town stopped at the Historical Society and was talking to something he had a lead on, and they gave him a couple more and told him to go hunt it. If anybody asks you, just tell them I sent you out there. They are usually very accepting. And you go to a Historical Society meeting and you talk to them, I guarantee you're going to walk away with leads. In most cases, that's what I've come across myself. That's what I've heard. I'm not saying that there's not, you couldn't have your local Historical Society and they're against metal detecting. I mean, I'm sure that happens, but most cases I hear very positive things about the Historical Societies. But speaking of that, I just checked chat. And Mike's in here, Mike Fuson, and I think he's got some really good stories about leads and stuff he's gotten at Historical Societies and stuff like that. I know he's been to some of them and talked to them. So I think that's a really overlooked lead. What do you think, Dorian? You got anything to add to that? You ever had any luck?
Yeah, I've talked to our local historical society and picked up a few leads. The problem is that we had some people in our little bitty town that metal detected, and they beat me to all the good sites around that little town. But that certainly did not beat me out of good sites because our whole county's full of them. The history of this county goes back to 1740, and we have so many abandoned old house sites out in fields and back in the woods that have never been touched with a detector. I call this area the land that time forgot because we probably have about 10% or less in terms of numbers of people that use detectors than the average county would.
I've been metal detecting a long time, and one just came to mind that I actually forgot. This is going way back. Stopped in a little town, and there was an old, this is in Ohio, and there was an old, I guess jailhouse you would call it, and we're talking from the 1800s, still standing, probably hadn't been used since the 1800s, really, really old, and there was a marker on it, and something about the Historical Society. I mean, my mind, I can't go back that far, and there were wherever the Historical Society was, I found that they were closed or something, And the lady come walking up to the door, as I recall, and asked if she could help me. And I told her, and she was the mayor. And in the town square was a lot of the historical people. The city owned it. And I went and ended up talking to all of them. They were very interested in what I was doing and gave me permission to metal detect it. Don't be afraid to talk to those people. I mean, I'll be the first one to admit I am not the best at going up to a door and knocking on a door and at somebody's house and asking permission. I do it. It stresses me out. It makes me nervous. But when I'm talking to somebody, a mayor or somebody, and I have no problem with it. No problem. And you will find they're some of the nicest people. I can't tell you of a single bad situation I've had in doing that. And it's highly overlooked. I think so many people think, that there's going to be possible negative fallout from it. And I have yet. I mean, they're the most interested in what we do, I think, especially local historical societies and stuff. So the next one I want to talk about is libraries. And, of course, everybody knows about their library, but it amazes me how many people I talk to who are looking for a piece of information and, they tell me all that, I researched online, I did this, and it's usually, I think so many of us have gone to online that we think everything's there, and there's so much that your public library is going to have. You're going to find the most at the library where the county seat is, but you're going to find stuff. And I'll give you an example. Again, the last town I lived in, I came across, I think, across is not correct, is it? Across?
Yeah. Okay.
I came across an obscure, it was actually in a book. I was talking to the librarian. Also, librarians are usually very helpful. I've never had an issue. They'll spend time with you, put you in a direction. I just went up to her and told her what I'm doing. I'm a detectorist. I'm looking for leads for metal detecting. Oh, well, let me show you this section. This is all our local history kind of stuff. And I go over there and I took a pile of books, sit down, and just started going through them and looking at different things. And in two different books over, I want to say, I don't think I found it in just one book or both books that day. I think it took a couple times. A mention of a very obscure town long before they started mapping Ohio. The first book the information in there, I couldn't have even told you what county it was in, or I'm sorry, which township. But the second one gave me enough, and after some more, we'll get into this, getting out and actually searching and looking a few times, I found the site. I found where this town was that was just cornfields. And, that libraries are so overlooked. A lot of times, we're so spoiled, we go online, excuse me, and, everybody knows about Historical MapWorks and what's some of the other ones. There's another one I use for a little bit later maps. And then I've got everything saved in my searches, but which we could talk about another time. We don't need to get too far into that. There's a lot of different maps we have access to. But and Historical MapWorks has so many of them, but I have found, I'm trying to think, just one time, I've only found it one time, but I recently just heard about it as well. Earlier maps that were not on Historical MapWorks. One was a county from where I'm from. Went in and there was a much earlier map that was nowhere to be found online. I can't give up names or anything or where they live or even what state, but I just talked to somebody the other day that was talking about how how their area is heavily hunted, especially field hunting, and it's really hard now to find sites. They went to their local library and found a map that's not online, and they are getting into spots that nobody else has hunted. No more of running into other people. And that's what we want. I mean, metal detecting overall is picking up and more people, and to really get to those less out of, hunted places, we got to think outside the box a little bit and work a little bit harder to find them. And libraries are an absolutely great resource. I know very few people who will go spend time at the libraries. And that's just shocking to me. I'll tell you another thing I found at a library one time. I found it was done, if I remember correctly, by the local historical society. It never went into publication. It was put together just for the library. It was a list of all the cemeteries, of all the cemeteries in the county, including some that were gone. And if, some of these, we're talking, Ohio was founded in 1803. Some of these went back to when the town, when the area started. This area is very early. It was like 1793, I believe, when the first settlers came there to this area. And some of them went back, late 1790s, early 1800s. And where that came in handy, some of them that long predated the map by many years, next to it had, church was here. There was also a church, or it was believed there was a church here. You talk about some good leads. I didn't go hunt in the cemeteries. It wasn't like that, but it put me on some really good leads for old churches. And I found some good ones. I found some really nice early relics for that county for sure, and really paid off. Now, here's one that I haven't, I've never used. Matter of fact, I didn't know that we actually could, but Dorian and I were talking about it the other day, and he has extensively. Dorian, you want to jump in about university libraries?
Yes. This is a really good lead for anyone wanting to find unworked Civil War sites or lost Civil War sites, maybe camps that are known to exist. Nobody's ever been able to find the location. Alumni of graduates of various universities, in this case, I'm going to use SMU in Dallas as an example because that was the last one that I was in regards to what I'm about to tell you. They will donate diaries and journals written by their ancestors who fought in the Civil War. And they are kept in a special section. They're not available for casual observation. You have to ask, and they'll direct you to that section of the library, let you in and show you their collection. In the case of the SMU, at the time I was there, they had about 20 personal diaries and journals kept during the Civil War by soldiers who survived and came home. And they were absolutely gold mines when it came to X marks the spot about where, we camped at, we named our camp, Camp Anderson after our colonel. And it was located near where the railroad trestle crosses Jones Creek, about half a mile from the road. I mean, stuff like that is in these diaries and journals. The only drawback is they're handwritten, and of course, some of the writers' penmanship is a little hard to read. They used flowing script back then, and some of it's quite good. So, even the journals, which are a little hard to read, if you are patient and just go through them, and study the words, you'll start to pick out the letters and things. And they're a gold mine. If you're just, but you'll need to take an afternoon and go to the library and maybe when it's raining or something and you can't hunt, go there and just spend the afternoon going through 3 or 4 or 5 of those library journals. And again, I don't know what every library's policy is. I'm sure they vary, but it is a resource. And if you can access those journals and diaries, they're not something that have been published in any magazines or talked about on any podcasts. They're fresh, and there were hundreds of thousands of Civil War camps, and probably 100,000 of them have been found, and there's probably 300,000 that have not. It's just that many. So these will help you find some of those. Okay, back to you, Mike.
Good job. Yeah, that's awesome. That's something I've never done, and I didn't know if we could. So that's something I'm going to look into. And thank you for that. That great one. Where were we at? What I want to do next here? Oh, older folks. I one time met a man that was 92 years old that would sit and talk to me for hours and tell me things. Actually, when I lived in Dayton, Ohio, or in the Dayton vicinity, I never lived in Dayton. I lived north of it, where the trolley stops were. Told me all about the old trolley. What a neat man. And with it, 92 years old, and I mean with it, he actually gave Dillinger a ride not long before he was killed. He was big into bowling. He worked at a bowling alley, and he was at his friend's house getting ready to leave, and it was pouring rain. And he walked out the door, and there was a guy in a suit, getting ready, waiting at the bus stop. Asked the guy if he needed a ride. He said he did. He said he'd give him even some money or whatever for gas or whatever. They head out, and the weather got real nice. And I don't know if I've ever researched this, but I can't remember what it is now. He pulled over to take the skirts off his car. What would have the skirts been, Dorian?
They would have been fender skirts around the wheels, I guess.
Okay. Well, he pulled over to do that, and this guy jumped out, and he was helping him, and his coat came open, and he saw a pistol under his coat, and he was real, he was leery. He was out in the country, and he was taking him out by a lake, and I had never heard of that lake has been filled in. I've never even heard anybody ever talk about that lake ever, Dorian.
Wow.
And he said a school bus come along, and the guy said, "Hey, I appreciate it. I went far enough. That's far enough. I'll walk the rest of the way." And he finished along and left. And a couple of days later, he saw him in the newspaper that Dillinger had been killed. And Dillinger was in the area because I grew up not too far, a couple towns away from New Carlisle, and one of the old banks there has a plaque that they were robbed by Dillinger. So that was really neat. But he told me just all kinds of things about the Dayton area and different places. And you get an old person talking, and I'll tell you what, not only if you're into history like I am, you're going to have some of the best conversations, but you're going to learn a lot of things, and not all of it was leads. But there was a ton of leads. Some of it was just really neat historical stuff. I guess if you listened hard enough, everything, even like the Dillinger story, had a great lead. The lake I'd never heard of, and all that. So that's a great resource. Another one that goes right along with that is property owners, and especially farmers, as people that own large amounts of property. I couldn't tell you how many times I have. Well, here's a really good one. I knew on this piece of property, probably 100 plus acres, that there was a house site, and I get permission from the guy. A lot of it's an apple orchard, and I go there, and he talks my ear off about. I believe he was probably in his 60s, and he was third generation family member owned, and he told me so much about the history. Oh, excuse me, and even put me on an earlier cabin. I want to say that his grandfather knew about, or it was there when he had bought it. I had a lady that her husband had passed, and her and her sons, mostly her sons, did all the farming, and she got a hold of me to see if I would come find property stakes for her. And she said, you come out, I'd be more than happy to pay you and this and that. And I said, well, where do you live? She lived maybe 20 minutes away. I said, you don't need to pay me. I'd be more than happy to come out. And she told me so much about not only a local history, but her farm and all their property, and put me on some good leads. I would say farmers, in many cases, it's sometimes 2, 3, and more generations have lived on it. Here's another one. I know of a farmer that the road is named after him. It's his last name. It's probably a 2-mile stretch of road. And I knew his house was built sometime around 1900. And I knew of an earlier site on his property, and he told me of 2 more. And one he knew about, I want to say his grandfather or somebody like that, a great-grandfather, I don't recall, had come down that there was one, here. But, because of farming it, he'd come across another spot where he would see pottery and stuff. And maybe even if they don't know their property, and a lot of farmland subbed out, bigger farmers do it. If you can talk to those farmers, they will put you on spots and tell you history. And sometimes they know the history of the general vicinity as much as any local historian would. That's been my experience. Have you come across that, Dorian?
Yes, I have, Mike. And will you finish this up? Let me dovetail in with the old folks in the rest homes. Let me talk about that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
But yeah, I agree with you. The old farmers are. Oh, and by the way, Mike, let's throw this one in under your topic there. Small towns. If you're out going somewhere, you're not in a hurry, drive the back roads. And when you come to small, semi, or almost total ghost towns, and you see an old, kind of looks like maybe actually a general store more than a convenience store, boy, go in there, because that'll probably be the social center for that little town.
Right. And or hardware stores are real good, too.
Okay, that's excellent. Yeah, I forgot about those. But if you go in these general stores, especially in cold weather, you might see 3 or 4 or 5 guys probably in their 70s, 80s, or 90s sitting around a potbelly stove. And boy, if you see that, you have struck gold. Go over there and introduce yourself, and tell them that you're researching the history of the area, and could you ask them some questions? And those old guys will probably just do everything they can to bend over backwards to help you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think a lot of us, I and me including, believe me, I'm not giving, not judging anybody here. I'm a introvert in a lot of ways. I know that's funny. That's probably funny to people scratching their head like, well, you're doing a podcast. I love history and I love metal detecting. But to get out in public, I'm not really a big talker and stuff. I'll tell you what, make yourself go into one of those general stores, make yourself go up and talk to one of those old guys, and it gets so much easier. Not only will you come away with leads, you're gonna have a great conversation. And I'll tell you, some of the most successful people I've met in this hobby, it's not that they're better detectors, they have a better detector. It's that they're extroverts and love talking to people. Trucker Bob, an excellent example. That guy would just walk up to anybody and start talking to him. We got to know each other because he'd call me all the time and talk metal detecting. And, you know, he's a very likable guy. He's a very honest, upfront kind of guy. And that was his thing. And I mean, he didn't mind. He'd go knock on doors. He didn't care. You know, where I don't like that, I love talking to people. I don't know. When I knock on somebody's door, I mean, I almost, no matter how well I put it, I feel like hey, do you mind if I dig big nasty holes in your yard and steal any treasure that might be there? And I do. I know I'm not going to find a treasure. I know, I'm going to put it back nice, but at the very least, I feel like that's how it's perceived. But I absolutely have no problem going and talking to a mayor, going and talking to the Historical Society, going into a little general store or a hardware store and striking up a conversation. And boy, will you get a wealth of information. Yeah, Chris, this is the live chat. And Rhino, welcome. Boy, I'm sure glad to see George in here. But, yeah, I kind of got off subject there a little bit, didn't I?
Not really.
Oh, did I do okay?
I think you did okay.
Well, let me say this. I talked so much that I forgot what our exact subject was. You know, Dorian, I see when you sent this back, I'm missing one, and I'm glad I remembered it. Guys, I'll tell you another real good one here that I have had just excellent success with. eBay. You can save searches and get notifications on those searches. And what I would do, what I do is I have a search. I honestly haven't done it for a while. I still go periodically and go look. What I used to do was save searches for the county I was in, Miami County, Ohio, or towns there, Troy, Ohio, Piqua, Ohio, Tip City, Ohio, that kind of thing. And I got one, I'll tell you, just an incredible, some of the best information I ever got. I got a little pamphlet, and I think it was called 6 or 7 Tours of the County. And I I got this pamphlet. It's one of the best pieces of research history I've ever had in my life. I didn't look at it. It was paper thin, and I put it up on my bookshelf. Didn't look at it. If I remember correctly, it was over a year before I looked at it. Or maybe it was that winter or something like that. I'm not sure. I know months had gone. I can safely say months had gone by. I pull it out, and I start looking through it, and oh my goodness, I couldn't believe what I was finding. So how this went is everything started at the fairgrounds. And it would say, I'm just giving you an example off the top of my head. Go out of the east entrance and turn left. Drive 6.2 miles. The house on your left was built in 1803. The bricks were fired on site by, blah, blah, blah was the first owner. Drive 0.4 miles and turn right. At 0.2 miles, the house on the left with the gondola, is it a gondola? Was a lookout for Indians. It was built in blah, blah, blah. This had ghost towns in it. And you think 6 or 7 tours of the county, there's not going to be each tour probably had 20 to 40 amazing leads. And if I remember correctly, I know it was written by the Historical Society, but I want to say it was put together in like the 1950s or 60s. Never seen a copy before, never seen one after it. Even the library didn't have one. I actually gave it to that local historian I met that gave me so many leads. I kick myself in the rear to this day for not copying it. And it should have gone to the library because, like I said, it was very obscure. But what an amazing piece of information I pulled off of eBay, and I think I paid $2-3 for it. Chris Heil said, I thought gondolas were boats. Maybe it's
Mike, tell him in Italy they are.
Okay. Am I still saying it right? Is it a gondola?
You're close. I'm trying to remember the exact. It's talking about the big turreted round towers that would build on some houses that go up 2 or 3 stories. I'm trying to think if there's a central structure coming out of the roof. They call it a cupola.
Is that what it is? A cupola or a cupola?
Yeah, a cupola is a structure that's on top of a roof in some way. It can be square, round, whatever.
If you've lived in Ohio or in the East, you've seen them. They're pretty rare now because they were really early. But it's usually a room at the very top of the house. That's got windows all around it, and it was a lookout. Many of those, or all of them, unless it was designed later, just a design they kept around, was to look out for Indians, for hostile Indians. Cupola, yeah, there we go. Cupola, gondola. I was close, Chris. Come on, give me some credit here. So that was pretty neat. And, being that I was pretty new to that county, not the county I grew up in, it opened my eyes to so many things really quick that probably would have taken me years to research. The house built in 1803, the bricks were fired. I wouldn't have known that because if you drive by it, you can tell it's older. But boy, I sure wouldn't have known it was 1803, which coincidentally enough, I could not get permission for that one. But, they were actually pretty rude, and I was pretty excited, but that did not work out for me. Each tour was, drive 0.6 miles, turn right, 0.3 miles, that church, blah, blah, blah. And even the local historian who impressed me so much with her knowledge couldn't believe all the information in this little pamphlet. Just loaded. So what I'm saying, look on eBay now and then. You never know what's gonna be available. You can save searches for the county, the towns near you and stuff, and things will pop up. But even what else? I didn't buy a lot of things. I did buy that one. Just sticks out so much. Postcards. You'll see postcards for the county, and that'll lead to stuff. You don't even have to buy it to read the card and see this hotel from the 1800s kind of thing. But that eBay, not that I've bought a lot, but absolutely gave me my best lead ever. And it was just full of leads, one after another. And some of it was really obscure. 2 ghost towns that long predated the maps by a long shot. One of those towns that goes up and it's only there for 10, 20 years for whatever reason it moved. I could give you the reasons, but there's a good chance I'll hunt that county again. And just gave up some incredible leads, some really obscure stuff. Not all of it was easy most of it wasn't easy to know. So that was just absolutely fantastic. And we'll keep moving on here. I know Dorian's got a lot coming up. Covered all that. Old maps. And of course, if you've listened to the whole show, we talked about old maps. There are some great old maps, Historical MapWorks and some of the others. If you didn't catch the show from the beginning, sometimes I've found where the county library will have maps that are not online that usually predate the oldest maps you can find online. So I'm telling you guys, libraries, everybody knows of a library. But I think so few detectorists take advantage of what can be found in the library. I have found some fantastic leads. Absolutely fantastic. And I have found every library I've been to, they have been nothing but fantastic. Very helpful, very supportive, even when I talk about metal detecting. So, especially if you have something you're researching and you've run out of material online, go to your library. Before you start, thinking you can't find it or there's too much, go to the library. Trust me. The old maps, back on that. I'll tell you some really interesting things that I have found on maps that's really worth mentioning. Over the years, I have overlaid a lot of maps. And we talked about this last show, actually. I'm just going to bring it up quick. You will find on old maps that I don't think I ever find on new maps is where the springs were. If you go hunt around a spring, I've never had bad luck around a spring. First off, imagine coming to an untamed wilderness like Ohio in the late 1790s. Let's say you're traveling through, but you come across that spring. Of course, think about it. The Indians who were here before the settlers, when they traveled, they needed water sources. What better place to camp? Okay, we've got creeks and rivers and all that, but what if it's going to rain? What if it has been raining and it's flooded? Springs produce so well, and you're going to find those on old maps. Even if nobody settled around that spring, you can almost bet it was used to camp overnight or a couple days. What if the creek's up so high you can't get across it? Where are you going to stay? You still need water. Your animals still need water. You're going to stay near a spring, right? Which also takes me into, Dorian, did you cut my list a little short?
No, sir.
Because another one I'm missing is
no. I just inserted mine in there. I did not remove anything of yours.
Because another thing missing is thinking like them. Which
we didn't really. I didn't see that one on there, Mike.
I'm not going to take the time to pull it up now. I could have swore I put that on there, but I know we talked about it. Maybe I didn't put it on yet. But if you can think like them and what the land was like back then, perfect example I just gave you. You're traveling with your family. You might have brought some cattle, some chickens, couple cattle, maybe some hogs, or even if not, you've got your horses and your wagon and stuff, and you get stuck in a bad rain and the creek's up or the river's up and you can't cross it for a while and you're still heading west, but yet there's a spring. Well, it only makes sense. You still need water's still very important. You don't know how much higher the creek's going to come up. Military regiments oftentimes use springs, but we'll get into that just a little bit more about thinking how they lived back then. But another one here I want to get into a little bit on old maps is on many occasions I've come across almost little footnotes in maps. For example, on one map I come across, it was from the 1870s. In the 1780s, I believe, maybe 1770s, there was a war. Another one I don't want to give up. Was called a war, although it really wasn't much of a war, where Virginians came into Ohio and encamped, and a treaty ended up being signed. Well, on this map, although I believe it to be incorrect, it says here's where this camp was. And, if nothing else, that tells you there was a camp in the area. I've also seen, where an early trading post was supposedly at. And marked, we're talking, that one I want to say was 100 years before the map. Just like this other one I've seen where in Ohio where, Mad Anthony Wayne camped here. Although the map is from the 1870s, and we're talking Mad Anthony Wayne 1790s, there was notes on that map for that. So when you're looking at old maps, look for those kind of notes. That's just a few examples, but, there's leads on maps. And I'll tell you, on more than one occasion, I found them to be wrong, but it gave me the idea. I mean, it put the bug in my head, to go look for that. Thinking like they did and trying to get in their head, and this goes really good with, how to look for how to look over a site. Back then they didn't have air conditioning, didn't have refrigerators. They didn't have washing machines. They didn't have electricity. So even when you're doing an old house site, if you can put yourself in that position to how they lived and what life was like, it can really help you. I mean, here's another good one. The site that I just told you about, the one camp. Where it's marked on a map and where everybody believes it was, I don't think it was there. And the reason I say that, they stayed there for a couple weeks. And it's right on the creek, and it's not even in a real high spot along the creek. Less than a quarter of a mile away, in the tallest place in the area were 3 springs. Now, any military man, Dorian, if you're coming along and you're in hostile country and kind of all alone with your men, are you going to camp in a somewhat low spot along the creek, or are you going to pick the highest ground?
Well, no. If you're any kind of a competent officer, you're going to pick the highest ground, because flash floods on these creeks are common. I know. I live on one.
Right. And that's another really good point to think of. You could, perfect example, you could look at that, at that creek today and say, well, it's such a small creek, but it provided water. There is no way that creek dries up at times. It's so small. But if you look back on the older maps, there were mills on that creek. Creeks have filled in and have been filled in. I learned that many years ago studying a map that is a creek that is nothing more than a ditch. And it was a vital creek in this area that powered 7 mills. I believe it was 7 mills, and I'm talking like 3 or 4 miles. And I scratched my head at first. Like I said, this was many years ago. Like, how? And it's like, creeks get filled in. All the farming they were doing and how they were doing it for so many years has filled creeks in and stuff. So, that's another one, step back into time, put yourself in their shoes. And I think that is a good one that leads into boots on the ground. Sometimes when all else fails, do as much, when you have a basic understanding of the area and what's going on, and you have a general vicinity, sometimes you're never going to find enough to put you to find X marks the spot. But you can use clues to get you there, like high ground, looking through old maps and seeing, well, here's another perfect example. I told you about that campsite. At the same time, about 3 miles away, was another regiment, and for some reason, it's not nearly as well known as the other one, although they had the same amount of men almost. That camp what I'm getting at is you can find, it's not super well known, but you can find some references to it, like the old map. But the other one, I found it was, excuse me, some obscure reference to it. And it's not marked on a map or, in the vicinity or anything. Although it was just as big and they camped there just as long, by putting myself in their shoes, I feel like I've tracked it down. And I could be way off, and it's something when I get back to Ohio, if I ever move back to Ohio, it's something I'd like to put some time into and try to hunt down. Because I don't think that's ever been found. Matter of fact, I don't think the other one's been found, because I think everybody believes X marks the spot. It's on this creek, and I don't think they've thought to go there. But put yourself in their shoes. Again, I think am I beating a dead horse now, Dorian? Did I make my point?
You get a little repetitious on some of that.
Yeah. But, you get the point.
Yeah.
Look for the high ground. Look for things out of place. Look for water sources, those kind of things. And it can put you on some of that. And so, Dorian, I think I am pretty wrapped up. I want to double check everything, but yeah, I'm wrapped up. So I'm going to turn the show over to you.
Okay. Let's see. Let me bring my notes back up. Here we go. Another great resource. If you are a person who has ever given a presentation about your metal detecting or relic hunting to school kids, for example, you also want to hit the rest homes and old folks retirement communities. They're always looking for guest speakers, and that gets you in the door, and it opens the door for the elderly residents to talk to you about the history that they have lived. These poor old folks are hungry for outside social contact, and many of them will talk your ear off gladly and make you a present of leads and details that were only known to the people who had lived in a certain area and grew up there. And in the process of helping yourself, you're going to help these people, because a lot of them have been parked in those rest homes by their relatives and basically abandoned. And they're struggling with a deep, deep loneliness. And you can really make a difference, if not in their lives, at least in a day, the day that you come and talk to them. But think about speaking to those groups, because once you've spoken to the group, you're in with everybody. You don't have to go around and try to meet everybody. They're going to come and they're going to want to talk to you after you're done speaking. And you will get leads. You might have to listen to some of their troubles and some of their frustrations, but in the process, they'll answer your questions. Just if they get off track, bring them back, with gentle questions, and get them back on topic. I ran into a guy the other day. He's not in a rest home. I actually bought some wood from him. He's 94 years old, and he cuts wood for a living at 94. And he's really spry and sharp as a tack, and he worked the railroad for 60 years. if I wanted to hunt old railroad camps, I would sit down with this guy and with a recorder and get him to start talking, because I'll bet he could really give me some X marks the spots. So, okay, enough on that. Another source, Mike was talking about maps. Another source of good maps that can help you in a certain area is the county tax clerk's office. They can tell you how to access the oldest maps they have of property owners in the county. And if you luck out and get a map made back in the mid 1800s or earlier, it'll have the names of property owners, and it'll have their houses and their barns marked on it. So there's an excellent source. And it also should contain things like one-room schoolhouses and churches that are now long gone. So county tax clerk's office, they will have a map room, and they let people, the public's allowed to access those to do research, so that they can, do research on various properties and titles and things like that. Okay. I want to talk to you about Google search. Everybody says, well, I know how to Google search. Well, you probably do, but maybe I can help you Google search better. Let me give you an example of how to work up leads with a Google search that you may not know. Let's take something like, a popular cavalry carbine during the Civil War was the 7-shot Spencer. Well, what you do is, in your search window, you type in Spencer carbine images, and it will bring up a link, and when you click on that, it'll give you pages of images of Spencer carbines. Now, every one of those pictures has a website connected to it. All you have to do is click on the picture, and it will open in a separate window, and right up to your left at the top will be the website link, and you can click on that, and it will take you there. And, this is how I'm doing a series in our Civil War group about Civil War firearms. Well, I bring up the image of the firearms I want to research, and then I click on the website. A lot of times I get gun dealers, antique gun dealers, that are trying to sell these guns, and they're giving a complete history of the gun, who made it, and sometimes even where their gun shop was, where they actually manufactured the guns. And so you're also going to get other things with the images. Every picture on that page won't be a Spencer carbine. It might be some other kind of a gun or a pistol or something that's not directly related to Spencer carbine, but those also can be brought up in a window, and you can get the web page and go to them, and you can pick up leads that way. But the big thing is, when you click, when you type in images of anything, for example, let's see. How about toll house images? We all know there used to be toll roads, and we know that toll houses, if you can find where they were, any old road that has the name Turnpike on it had a toll house. But if you can find where the toll house was, they might have missed it, and if it hasn't been hit, you're going to find some coins there for sure, some old coins. So you bring up toll house images and click on the picture again. You'll get the link to the web page. Go to the web page. There might be a history web page, and they'll tell you exactly where that image, where that toll house was, where it was located. X marks the spot. So think about doing your Google searches that way. I have turned up more leads than I can even keep track of that way in the process of just researching almost anything historical. Okay, now, let's see. Okay, Mike, what I've got left now is the Civil War researching. Are we ready for that? Hello, Mike. Is anybody there?
Oh, sorry, I was answering you. I put you on. I muted myself.
Okay.
I'm like, why isn't he hearing me? Yeah, no, we're ready. I'm all ready.
All righty. Okay, I want to touch, before we get into what I call the ORs here, I want to touch on eBay again. Mike mentioned eBay. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was able to purchase the official Civil War Atlas on eBay. It's a huge book. I'm 6'1", and I'm not a small man. And if I hold this book in front of me, it will hide my stomach and my chest completely, right up to my chin. It's a huge book, and it's about 2.5, 3 inches thick, and it has in it beautifully detailed, drawn, colored in maps of all the major battlefields and the places where there were major supply depots and different kinds of military operations during the Civil War. It is a companion to what we're going to be talking about here for a while, called the Official Records of the War of the Rebellion. It's designed to supplement the written records. And it was the maps were drawn by the military cartographers in the armies. And I'll tell you what, these guys were good. Not that every single map is 100% accurate where they place the battle lines, but it's the most accurate thing and the most extensively detailed set of maps on the Civil War that you can easily access. And this book probably sells brand new for, I haven't priced for sure. I could be wrong. Somebody could check me out on this real quick. But I'm thinking it sells for about $125 new. And like I said, I bought mine and it was used, but it was in like new condition when I got it. So that was a whole giant book of leads for $35. And, I have had many a day of relic hunting where I found a whole lot more in value in relics than $35 just in one day. So I would say all of you that are interested in Civil War, try to add this book to your Civil War library, your own personal library. Now, let's talk about what we call the ORs for short, the Official Records of the War of the Rebellion. This is the biggest source of leads to Civil War sites in existence, period, bar none. It was put together, made into books in 1895, and it contains, in 128 volumes, it contains all the surviving reports of both the United States and Confederate States officers from the rank of lieutenant up, their after-battle reports, reports of their expeditions from one place to another, and it also contains the correspondence between military officers, the private correspondence, and also the correspondence between public officials and military officers. And these books, I have about 8 of the 128 volumes. They're collector's items and they're expensive. So the best way to go about getting a set of the ORs, there's 2 ways to access them. You can go online. Cornell University has a website, and you can access the ORs and you can do searches on them. But I actually bought my ORs just about 3 weeks ago on eBay again on 2 CDs. I've got the whole 128 volumes. Cost me $17 with free shipping. $17. And one of these 8 books I've got, I could get $75 a piece for those books easy. So because they're collector's items. So you can get your CDs, but you want to be sure. There's a number of sellers of these ORs on eBay. Make sure in the description it says that they're searchable. That way, you're going to do a lot better on finding leads in these books. If they're searchable, that means that you can type in any word, like, for example, let's say you live in Maryland and you're interested in the Battle of Antietam. You can type in the word Antietam and it will bring up links for every reference to Antietam in the ORs, which will be all of the reports of the officers that, about the battle. So, excuse me, if you're in a smaller town, let's say you're in, Staunton, Virginia. I do know the Confederate troops camped around Staunton early in the war. I don't think there was a major battle fought in Staunton, but there probably were skirmishes and this type of thing. There are a lot of camps. What you'd want to do, is try get a map of Staunton and the surrounding area, an older map, and look for mills. Like, let's say you look on the map in Staunton, and here it says Jenkins Mill. Well, you can type in Jenkins Mill into your search window in the ORs, and it'll bring it right up. If all the references in the entire 128 volumes to Jenkins Mill will appear as links that you can click on, and it will take you right to the page, and you can read about that. And that way, you can find places where troops camped. If Jenkins Mill doesn't come up in your search, then you go on to something else, like Smith's Ferry. Type in Smith's Ferry. See, whatever you find in the way of landmarks like ferries and mills. The soldiers hung around mills because they used the mills to grind wheat to make their bread. That's a common thing. And they're also they camped at the ferry crossings on larger creeks and rivers, this type of thing, or at the fords. Johnson's Ford. Just whatever you can find on the old maps, run it through the ORs using the search window, and you're going to get some leads. You're going to turn up leads, and when you read these leads, you'll understand when you go to the leads it brings up, and you actually read what the ORs have to say about that site, you're going to understand. And I am going to be reading you leads right out of the ORs that I have pulled, and I have been amassing a file of good leads of where a person might go to find an unworked Civil War site. Well, I've got more than I'll ever get to, so it's not going to hurt me at all to share some of those leads with you. So you might, if you're interested in finding unworked Civil War sites, you might want to get ready to take some notes, because I'm about to get into some of these leads. Sometimes a lead is right in front of your eyes and you don't recognize it. It can be real simple, but it can be the thing that kicks off a really great search and location. I have in front of me a page out of one of the 128 volumes, and this concerns operations, it says at the top, in Kentucky, Middle and Eastern Tennessee, Northern Alabama, and Southwest Virginia. All right, this is a lead. Most of these are going to be leads in Kentucky because I was focused on that because I had moved to Kentucky from Texas. So at the top of this particular page, it says report of Lieutenant Colonel W. Huntington Smith, 20th Michigan Infantry. Okay, he's a colonel. That tells you that he's the commanding officer of a regiment, almost certainly a regiment. The 20th Michigan Infantry could be anywhere from, at that time, the date is May the 12th, 1863. Probably they had 800 to 1,200 men. The average, or the full regiment's about 1,000. Sometimes they had extra. Usually they were a little below the full amount. The Confederates were a lot below the full amount. They would average 350 to 500 men to a regiment at this time in the war. But the Yankees usually had more men in the regiment. Now, he's writing to his commander, and he says, Colonel, I hereby submit to you my report of the duties performed by this regiment. See there, now you know how big the unit is. You're dealing with approximately 1,000 men. And he says, from Tuesday, April 28th to May the 12th, 1863. And then he goes on. I'm going to skip through this because there's a lot. I have too much to read all of it because I've got more leads I want to get to. And he starts with Tuesday, and he says, agreeable to your order this date, I marched from the brigade at Green River. Now, the brigade was about 5 regiments. So that means at Green River, there were 4 regiments camped. There's another lead. Oh, by the way, right underneath where he says headquarters, 20th Michigan Infantry, he says Columbia, Kentucky. So there's your first lead right below, the description of the report. So he's camped at Columbia, Kentucky. That's his headquarters, which means that it's not just an overnight camp. It means that they have established, a camp, and they intend to be there for a while. They've established headquarters. Okay, so then he says that he left the brigade at Green River toward Columbia, where it was intended we should do provost duty, protecting citizens and property. So he's being sent to Columbia. So he gets there, and then on Wednesday, here you go. He says, having already marched about 12 miles, I continued on the road for about 2.5 miles, and I halted for the night. There's a clue to where they camped that night. Might not have a lot of relics, but it might have some. And it's a camp that probably nobody's touched. All right, on Wednesday, I received your order of this date in which we were instructed to leave Columbia, leave our teams and knapsacks, and proceed from there in light marching order with 3 days' rations to Greasy Creek by way of Jamestown. How's this? I mean, this is exact. See, you know the route they traveled to reinforce Colonel Jacob. So here's another colonel. That means another regiment. He's camped at Greasy Creek, on Greasy Creek, but the Greasy Creek could be long. See, so we don't really know. It's not an X marks the spot yet. But we're going to read a little farther. He's going to reinforce Colonel Jacobs at Greasy Creek. He says, I was to move by forced marches and to march by daybreak. Forced marches are hard on soldiers, and they tend to throw away heavy stuff when nobody's looking. So the route that a forced march takes place on, a lot of times Civil War artifacts can be found. If you can find the old roadbed, which usually parallels the new roadbed, you can find relics thrown from either side of the old roadbed. They would throw away bayonets. They would throw away ammunition, things to lighten the load, things out of their knapsack, even canteens and things, because especially the Yankees, because they could always get more from the quartermaster, it seemed. Okay, now, he says on Thursday, we arrived at Jamestown. Passing through this place, I marched directly to the top of the bluff at the ferry over the Cumberland River at the mouth of Greasy Creek. There's your X marks the spot. Remained on the bluff till afternoon. Now, this is not where this lead ends, because they end up getting in a fight. Let's see where I'm going to break in here and read this to you. I'm going to skip some of this. He talks about the scouting and picket duty and so on. And here we go. At about 8 a.m., the enemy vigorously attacked our pickets with dismounted cavalry, and after a brief resistance for 15 minutes, remember that they could fire 2 to 3 aim shots a minute, so even a 15-minute battle, 100 men would fire 150 bullets in 15 minutes. And if you have 100 men on the other side, see, that's 300 bullets. Skirmishes sound small, but they can use up a lot of ammunition very quickly. And those ammunition they used up are now mini balls out there. They're Civil War artifacts, desirable to find. Okay, he says, so after a brief resistance, we drove them in upon the main line. Oh, there was a main line, okay? This was a battle between pickets. Pickets are the soldiers, the guards that are out in front of each army to screen the main army from being caught by surprise. So he says, I immediately brought forward companies F, G, and I, which were in reserve, and established a line as follows. Now listen to this. Company F was deployed as skirmishers along a wooded ravine on the right to prevent that flank from being turned. Company C and K were massed behind the crest of a small hill to the right of the main woods, while companies A and D were massed in a similar manner behind a fence on the crest of a high hill to the left. See, you get good at this, you practice, you can go to that site and you can read this, you have this lead with you, read this again there, get it fresh in your mind, and you can actually visualize where the lines were before you even start hunting. This narrows down the area where you'll want to search. Okay, now, he says Company I and G were in reserve at the foot of the hill in the rear of the center. About 4 p.m., one piece of Captain Sims' 24th Indiana Battery arrived upon the ground. That means a cannon, and took position on an eminence, that is a high point on the extreme left. A high point on the extreme left. So that tells you where the cannon was located. Companies B, I, and G were ordered forward to support the gun. The gun immediately opened a rapid and well-directed fire upon the house, the orchard, and the woods in which the rebels were massed. At the same time, a charge was ordered along the whole line, which was executed in a most gallant manner, clearing the enemy from the house, orchard, and fences where they had lain during the day and driving them into the woods. We were soon met by a countercharge in such immensely superior numbers that we were obliged to fall back to our former position, which was held with the greatest obstinacy for 3/4 of an hour. You got two regiments firing at each other for 3/4 of an hour. Do the math on what I just gave you a few minutes ago there. That's thousands of artifacts at this little skirmish site. It's not so little, see? You never heard of Greasy Creek. I'll bet nobody listening has ever heard of this skirmish near the mouth of Greasy Creek. See my point? Okay, the ORs are full of this kind of thing. Full. Here's another one. Report of Captain Wendell D. Wiltsey, 20th Michigan Infantry. Camp at Greens Ferry. Starts right out telling you that there was a camp, that they were camped at Greens Ferry, the 20th Michigan Infantry. And so he's reporting to the colonel, and he's talking about chasing some rebel guerrillas, and he talks about the difficulty. For example, he says, here we go. I want to do this. From here we proceeded. He's talking from the ferry. He says, just a minute. At the Narrows are on the Cumberland River, not too far from Cumberland Gap. At the Narrows, where Captain Barnes was stationed with his company as a reserve force, I left the Monticello Road on our right and proceeded by Mountain Pass to Harmon's Creek, thence back to the road at Alcorns, which is 9 miles from the ferry and 7 from Monticello. From here, we proceeded south to Beaver Creek and returned to Alcorns at 2 p.m. Saturday, the 9th instant, not having met any armed force, but capturing in all 12 prisoners and 5 horses. Now, Alcorns, we could say, okay, it must be somebody's house, but it's not, because he tells us what it is in the next sentence here. Anyway, we captured prisoner horses supposed to belong to the band we were in search of, and burning Alcorns Distillery, which was a lurking place for bushwhackers. Oh, man, what a lead. Those were Confederate bushwhackers. And they would have had some Confederate gear. Excuse me, maybe not all of them, but they're going to have some Confederate buttons and buckles and things. And that was a lurking place for them, if you could find where this distillery was burned. Let's see. Okay, he's talking about stuff that's not really Lee's, and we get down just to the last paragraph. We had not rested at Alcorns more than half an hour when my pickets toward Monticello were furiously attacked by rebel cavalry, whom we at first supposed to be guerrillas, but who were Morgan's advance guard of 300 men. Excuse me, I'm going to have to get a drink of water here. Just a moment. See, I'm reading this because I want you to see the detail, the information that's here about roads and landmarks, and how their battle lines were deployed. There is nothing else that gives us this wealth of information about sites. Okay, let's see. Furiously attacked by rebel cavalry, whom we at first supposed... Okay, Morgan's men. They dismounted instantly upon receiving the first fire, attempted to surround us under cover of the woods. Upon hearing the alarm shots, I immediately threw Company H into the road with fixed bayonets, and the cavalry under Captain Wilson forward to the support of the pickets. I soon discovered that while I could keep the enemy from advancing in the front... Okay, I'm sorry. I don't have the next page in order here, so I can't read the rest of that. But I think you're getting the... Oh,
man.
What? Yeah. You're getting the idea here. Let's see. And what's interesting is, you know, a lot of times you'll get the colonel's report, you'll get the regimental major's report, the captain's report, and the lieutenant's report, all on exactly the same battle, and you can compare them. And a lot of times one of the reports will give you a key detail that the other report did not give you that you needed. See, it talks about skirmishes at Columbia and Creelsboro, Kentucky. Who's ever heard of a Civil War battle at Creelsboro, Kentucky? These things are hidden in the ORs, so in plain sight. And the ORs are so voluminous, it intimidates a lot of people, and they don't go far enough into them to find all of these wonderful leads. Here's another skirmish at Russellville, Kentucky. And the guy gives the details, and he says, General Judah, now General's going to be in charge of several brigades, probably division. General Judah is not here, but at Carpenter's Mill on the Barren River. There you go. We're talking about a division, maybe, 10,000 men possibly camped at Carpenter's Mill on Barren River. And see, you could run a search on Carpenter's Mill and get all the references in the ORs to Carpenter's Mill. And you could pin it down exactly where it is probably by checking some of the other references to it. Okay, let's see here. Okay, we're going to switch areas of Kentucky here. And I'm actually going to give you a lead that's close enough for me to hunt. And you may have a little competition because I may go looking for it too. I have not looked for it yet, but I'll give you the details here. Let's see. This is the report of Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Young, 118th Ohio Infantry. There you go, Mike. You're an Ohio boy. Of the skirmish at Paris. This is Paris, Kentucky, not Paris, France. Okay. General, we fought the enemy 2 hours. They are repulsed on the Winchester Pike, but we fear they're going to attack us on the Mount Sterling Pike. They are about 2,000 strong. We can't hold the city against such a force, but we can and will hold the bridges until you send us reinforcements. If you can advise us, we will abandon the bridges and fight our way towards Lexington. But we can hold the city and whip them if you send us some help. We need cavalry very much. And this is the, Thomas Young, the commanding officer here. Now, he talks about how the enemy withdrew and retreated, but then they came back. And he says, about 2 o'clock, the telegraph operator Winchester arrived here informing the rebels occupy Winchester, Kentucky. He did not know what forces. He did not wait to ascertain. Now, we're talking about the road that runs between Winchester and Paris. There's only one main road. It's a modern road, but it also parallels the old road that they're talking about here. He says, after 4 p.m., the rebel advance drove in our pickets, but were immediately engaged by about 100 men of the 23rd Michigan and one piece of artillery of Henshaw's battery. This force held the enemy until reinforced by another company of the 23rd Michigan and one piece of von Salen's 15th Indiana battery. Our whole force might have been concentrated in the front at once, but it was feared that they would, by leaving a sufficient force to engage our troops on the Winchester Pike, flank us on the Maysville Pike, and burn the large trestle-work bridge of the Kentucky Central Railroad, which was doubtless their sole object in visiting us. And then he talks about his troop deployments and so on. But see, that's I've never heard. I've run with some of the Kentucky Relic Hunters. I don't know anybody that's actually hunted that skirmish on the Winchester Road. So that's one that needs to be checked out. That's a good lead, really is. Now let's see. How about a Confederate camp? I'll bet Rich Wolford. Rich, try not to drool too much now on this. I bet I'm going to have you thinking about coming to Kentucky and leaving West Virginia for a while. Hang on, here we go. Starts out, camp at Martin's Mill on Beaver Creek, Floyd County, Kentucky, January the 14th, 1862. General, when I reported last, the enemy was gathering in considerable force to my front upon my left flank near Paintsville in Johnson County. The force in my front advanced to the mouth of Sycamore Creek, 5 miles from my position at Paintsville, and remained in camp there several days. Fantastic leads. This force was 4,000 strong. You find them where they camped even for a few days, 4,000 men, and you are going to find relics. It was stated in the Cincinnati Enquirer of December 28th to consist of 5 full regiments of infantry, 200 cavalry, and 2 batteries of field artillery. A battery could have anywhere from 4 to 8 guns in it. The whole was under Colonel Garfield of Ohio, acting as chief of brigade. Okay, now, let's see. My scouts, having reported their count of this force at 1,300 at Salyersville, 16 miles upon my left. Let's see. January 9th, I had sent a detachment to the mill 1 mile below Prestonsburg, near to where I was compelled to draw to make bread for my men, and the enemy drove them away during the night. So we had activity around this mill, 1 mile below Prestonsburg. Now, I'm going to skip that one because they have just made a national military battlefield out of Middle Creek, and I had gotten a whole bunch of leads for hunting Middle Creek, but it's too late now because it's federal property, most of it. I'm just going to read you little excerpts here. Headquarters, Tompkinsville, Kentucky. This is a regimental camp at Tompkinsville. It says, I'm going to break into this paragraph. The captain lieutenant marched to perform the duties assigned them on the evening of June 4th and formed the junction as directed in my order the following day. Immediately marched towards Centerville in the direction of Tompkinsville and Salina, and on the night of the 5th encamped on the farm of a Mr. Moore about 8 miles from and to the south of Tompkinsville. Man, that is a great lead. And then he goes on to describe the skirmish they got into. I'm looking at these 2 pages, and there must be 20 leads on these 2 pages alone. But I'm going to go on. Let's see. Headquarters, 1st Brigade, 1st Division, General Army, Central Army, Kentucky, Oakland, Kentucky. I don't know where Oakland, Kentucky is. I haven't even looked it up yet. It's a little town. And here we have, it's the headquarters for the 1st Brigade. You've got 4 to 5,000 men camped here. And the point is, you can go through the ORs and you can mine the location of literally tens of thousands of camps. And you can't tell me they've all been found. I don't think half of them have been found yet. Now, maybe in Virginia, it's got about 1 million relic hunters, maybe 85% of their camps have been found, but not Kentucky. I'd say 85% of Kentucky's camps have not been found. But they're there. They're waiting for somebody like you or me to be smart enough, to be enough of a history detective to take these leads and work these leads. You might not find your camp on the first time out. That's part of paying your dues. That's what you have to be ready to put up with if you're going to find unworked sites. If you want to go hunt the sites that everybody else has hunted for 30, 40 years, go ahead. And you might find a little bit. But if you want the thrill of getting onto a site from the Civil War that's never been touched until you showed up, you're going to have to work for it. Mike was talking about boots on the ground. You bet. Corey Ryan, that's going to be our guest next week, and you want to be there for Corey. He's one of those guys that's been there and done that, like Keith Wills. Corey, just this past week, he and his partner, they live up in Virginia, towards northern Virginia. They walked and they walked and they walked. I think he said 7.4 miles, cold turkey, knowing that Civil War activity had been in the area, and they found an unworked Union camp. They finally walked into one. Would you be willing to do that? Well, they spent a day walking, but guess what? Now they can go right back to that camp, and they'll probably have, quite a few wonderful outings hunting there and finding the kind of things you find in a big Civil War camp. And listen, for all you folks there that are coin, we used to call them coin shooters back in the day. Now we call them coin hunters. But for all you folks that like to dig coins and say, well, I'm not interested in Civil War artifacts. I'm interested in coins. I got to tell you, I've dug 170,000 coins, and 85% of my really old coins have come off of Civil War sites. Civil War sites, camps, they are wonderful places to find old coins. So think about that before you write off Civil War completely. Okay, so this headquarters 1st Brigade is a CSA, at Oakland was a CSA camp. You got, let's say they had 500 men per regiment. You got 2,500 Confederates, and these guys are regular soldiers, and they're going to have Confederate belt buckles, Confederate buttons, and stuff to lose. It's a relic hunter's, sounds like a relic hunter's dream. Now, granted, some of these that I am reading to you, well, some of these have been found, I'm sure. I don't know which ones. I know they all haven't, and I don't think even half of them. I think probably 60 to 65% of the leads that I've got here are still good. Have you ever heard of Dog Walk, Kentucky? Mike, you ever heard of Dog Walk, Kentucky?
No, sir.
There was a skirmish there. And how about this one? 3 miles northeast of Chaplintown, USA camp. 3 miles northeast of Chaplintown. You got direction, you got mileage. outside of taking your hand and walking you to the site and say, dig here, I can't, I don't know what else to do for you. Okay. Um, let's see. Yeah. Report of Colonel Edwin Parrott, 1st Ohio Infantry. Headquarters, 1st Regiment, Ohio Volunteer Infantry, in camp, October the 9th, 1862. Captain, I have the honor to submit the following report of the skirmish. Now, here's a colonel submitting a report to a captain, so the captain will be the adjutant of a brigade commander. That's why he's submitting the report to an inferior officer or lower rank, because the captain is the direct, that's the orders he has from his superior officer. Submit your reports to Captain so-and-so here. All right. As my regiment left camp, the general commanding advised me that our rear was threatened by the enemy and ordered me to march back on the road until I overtook the 19th U.S. Infantry previously sent out. About a half a mile from camp, I came up with our troops on the road to Lawrenceburg. Major King, 15th U.S. Infantry, had his battalion drawn up in an open field where he commanded the road. Major Carpenter, 19th U.S. Infantry, was to his left and in the road, which at that point makes an abrupt turn. Oh, what a landmark! Being the ranking officer present, I posted the 1st Ohio behind the crest of a ridge in the skirt of the woods to the rear of the open ground, and ordered the battalions of regulars to fall back across the field and form on the same line and to the right of the 1st Ohio. In the meantime, Lieutenant Gunther had come up with a section. A section is usually 2 guns of Battery H, 5th U.S. Artillery. Just as our line was formed, the enemy appeared, marching by the flank up the hill in front of where I had found Major King's command. Lieutenant Gunther, having got one of his pieces in position, opened with such effect as to check the progress of the enemy and cause him to fall back under cover of the hill. So you're going to find artillery shrapnel and possibly artillery shells there. Major Draco at this time reported to me that the 49th Ohio Volunteers, or with the 49th Ohio Volunteers, and these are the Ohio Volunteers are wearing OVM belt buckles, Ohio Volunteer Militia, that are very valuable. And they're wearing probably Ohio State Seal breastplates on their cartridge box straps that are really valuable. Love to have one of those. Love to dig one. Well, this is how you find them. You go to places where the troops that wore them fought or camped. Let's see. The skirmish line in front of the 1st Ohio was strongly attacked and at one time driven a short distance from the hill on which it was posted, but being reinforced, rallied and in turn drove the enemy back. For nearly 4 hours, the firing was strong and steady. You've got thousands of bullets fired there, and probably dozens of artillery shells. And this is a skirmish near the little bitty town of Dog Walk, Kentucky. And he goes on and talks about the rest of the battle and the praises the commander of the battery and so on. Anyway, Mike, ask the folks in chat, do you have any specific questions about the ORs that I can answer for you? I could go on reading leads like this all night. I have enough, really. I've got enough leads right here in front of me for about the next 3 shows.
Wow. Well, you already did. I'll look to see if anybody responds.
Okay.
If y'all have any lead, do you have anything not in Kentucky, or is everything in Kentucky right now?
Oh, I have stuff. I didn't. Let's see. I have stuff in several states actually. I don't want to read the West Virginia stuff because we've got guys in our group. We've got a contingent of West Virginia relic hunters that are doing really good, and I don't want to give them any competition. So I'm not going to read you. You can research your own West Virginia leads in the ORs. That way they can't hold me responsible for
right
specifically anyway.
I gotcha. I'm not getting anything right now.
Okay. Let me read you another lead.
Well, Spike just said, "How about Washington State?" But I doubt you have anything Washington State.
Washington State. Wow. Boy. Yeah. I'll tell you what I would do in Washington State there, Spike. I have hunted Fort Vancouver, and I did really good for the first hunt. I found some really great buttons and musket balls and things. I don't know what the situation for Vancouver is now. That was quite a few years back when I hunted it, but check it out. It was huge. I mean, there was a lot of ground there where relics have been found, and it has been hunted for many years. But I think there's probably still stuff there. Want to read you another one? Let's see where we're talking about here. It's easy, whatever state you're in. You can do things like if you're in Indiana, where there weren't really a lot of battles. There was Morgan and his men did have some battles down in southern Indiana. The biggest one at Corydon, Indiana. You can go to the ORs, type in Corydon, and it'll bring up all the reports that were filed about the battle. Have a friend in Cincinnati that found a CS belt buckle there at Corydon.
Chris Hiles says he's in Kennewick.
Kennewick, Maine? Is that Maine?
I don't know.
Help me out. Chris, tell us where you are. What state? Get an answer?
Oh, and what? Well, hold on. In Washington.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'm not familiar with the geography of Washington because it's a little far out of my hunting territory right now, so I can't really help him on that. What we need to do is find a good hunter. Tell him, give me some time to think about it, and I'll try to come up with a source of leads for him specifically on Washington. I know people. I just need to get in contact with some people and see what I can come up with. And what was his last name, Chris?
Hiles, Hiles.
Hiles, Chris Hiles. Okay, write that down, and we'll see what we can do. Might take a few days. Just be patient. This is really interesting here.
Any areas south of Atlanta?
Well, there are tons of leads in the area south of Atlanta in the ORs, but you're going to have to go find them. Select the area that you're interested in, and like I said, go to the maps, pick out significant landmarks like fords, mills, and ferry crossings, things like that, and do searches on them in the ORs. And also type in the names of the small towns. Of course, you can type in Atlanta, for example, and you'll get several hundred leads because there's so much written about the siege of Atlanta and all that. But your best bet is to go after the skirmishes like the ones I'm reading to you that occurred around the small towns, and there were an awful lot of them down there. With Sherman coming through that area and all of that, there was a tremendous amount of Civil War activity. If I were down south right now, living there in Alabama, Mississippi, that's exactly what I would do. I would research the skirmishes, the smaller battles around the small towns, and I would also learn which roads carried the most troop movements during the Civil War, back and forth marching of troops, because they camped every 15 to 20 miles along the creeks or rivers. And so I would go look for those spots because those are usually really nice little honey holes when you find them. Want to read you this just to show you, though, here. Let me get the general location. This is down near the Cumberland River. He says, on Sunday the 10th at 8 a.m., the enemy drove in the advanced picket. I ordered the men to cover themselves as well as possible and fire slowly and deliberately, we occupying a strong position in the narrows of Horseshoe Bottom. This continued some 4 hours when I ordered one piece of cannon to be crossed over the river, being determined to discover the numbers and intention of the enemy. The other piece I ordered to the top of a hill on the other side of the river in order to cover our retreat if it became necessary. Anyway, he goes on. He says at 3:15 o'clock, after 7 hours and 15 minutes of skirmishing, I got one piece of artillery in position, and I then massed most of the 20th Michigan Infantry, 1 battalion of the 12th Kentucky Cavalry dismounted, armed with carbines, ordered them when the cannon opened on the enemy to charge them. Our men, led on by their gallant officers, charged on a house and lot by which the enemy was covered and carried everything before them. Finding the enemy had made a fortress of the house, I had it shelled. It became a hand-to-hand contest, and we drove them gallantly over a quarter of a mile until Morgan arrived with 7 fresh regiments. And it goes on and on. But you see how they fought all day. And you never heard of that battle. Well, neither have a lot of other relic hunters. That's the good news. Okay, Mike, nice. I see we're getting close to 10. What's your schedule? What time you want to wrap this up?
Oh, we can go ahead and wrap it up. I mean, I think we're waiting on Bill to come up with the answer to that riddle, though.
He hasn't got the answer yet, huh?
Well, I don't know. I haven't seen it. In the beginning, I was too busy to check chat. So, Bill, do you have that answer?
Why did the termite do that? Dead air, dead air, dead air, dead air, dead air.
He says he wants his treasure story served up raw and more tender than the bar.
He got it. He got it. That's right.
He said he posted it real early.
Oh, he did? Okay. All right. Congratulations. Yeah, it's fun to tell that one in a group of 10. Everybody looks at each other with puzzled looks on their face, and suddenly one person gets it and starts laughing, and then the rest of the group looks at them, and then another person gets it, and finally you always have one person in the group that never gets it, and everybody has to explain it to them. Termites eat wood, so he walks in, and the bar is made out of wood. So he says, is the bar tender here? Right. That's one of my favorite kind of one-liners, you know.
Right. That was good. I didn't know it. I missed it, but I didn't have much time to think on it.
Well, all right. So I got to tell Bill a treasure story, don't I? Okay. Well, Bill, this is a personal treasure story. I spent 30 years working the famous John Swift silver mine treasure stories. John Swift was some folks say a pilot. Some folks say he was the owner of a fleet of privateer ships that preyed on enemy shipping with the blessing of the United States. He was definitely a seaman from England originally, and he befriended a French captive of the French and Indian War, a guy named the last name of Munday, M-U-N-D-A-Y. And Munday told him that he and his father and 2 brothers had been working silver mines in central Kentucky, and that the Shawnee Indians had captured them and then killed his father and brothers, and he was young enough that they spared him and adopted him into the tribe, and later on he escaped, joined the French army, fought at Braddock's defeat, and anyway, ended up being released as a prisoner of war and was destitute, broke, and Swift helped him out And he was grateful, so he told Swift the location of the silver mines, and Swift and his men made an expedition into central Kentucky, which was very, very remote at the time. This was about 1760. Excuse me. Found the mines. They had two sets of mines. The richest mines, there were 6 of them, and it took me 30 years to find 4 of the mines. Swift had a man named Montgomery. I'm giving you the short version. The long version's in my book called Heroes and Hostiles, Volume 2. I have detailed information, including pictures of treasure signs on the rocks and all that kind of stuff, pictures of smelters and so on that I discovered over the course of my explorations. Anyway, Swift had a man named Montgomery who'd worked at the London Mint, and he made up a set of dies, and they basically made a lot of silver coins. They'd be, roughly the equivalent of they were British crowns, counterfeit British crowns, so they'd be the equivalent of a silver dollar in size and weight. And they were dated, I think, 1769, just one date since it was just one mold. But they actually had more silver in them than a real crown. So those coins are identifiable because they don't have the alloy to harden them, and they're actually softer than a regular British crown. They could be actually bent with a little bit of effort. But each one of those coins today is worth a small fortune. And Swift made a number of caches of these coins not too far from the mines, and he left a very cryptic map with nautical symbols on it. And it took me I had the help of Michael Paul Henson, the late Michael Paul Henson, who was one of the best treasure researchers the United States ever turned out, and I learned a lot from him. But anyway, I found the location of the mines, and I did find 2 of the cache sites. One of them on the map that Swift left, and I think it's still available. John Swift's Journal by Michael Paul Henson. It is the most accurate. There's 4 or 5 versions of his journal, and that is the most accurate one. And Swift gives detailed information on his mines, where they were, and he has a cryptic map with symbols on it. And one of these showed a star. Once I had found the rivers and creeks that he put on the map, I'd matched them to his map. Then I knew where the symbols were located. I didn't know what each symbol meant. The star was on top of a high mountain, and this mountain was interesting because as you got up near the top, it had an area that occupied about 1 acre maybe, and it was flat on top, this 1 acre, and when it was wooded with trees, and it was surrounded by 60-foot high cliffs in a circle. And they call these knobs. It's in the area of Kentucky called the Knobs. This is down near where Jackson, Lee, and Estill County, Kentucky come together. Also where 3 creeks, War Fork Station Camp and South Fork Creek, come together. The mountain that looms over them is the mountain I'm talking about. And we got up there, and here was this 60-foot, almost vertical cliff keeping us from getting to the top. And I knew that if the star represented a cache, they would be up on top in that little 1 acre area of woods. So we walked, and we started seeing flint everywhere. Apparently there was a lot of Indian activity, but for reasons I won't go into, we weren't able to do anything with the Indian stuff. And that was a kind of a distraction because we were after something bigger. Finally found where there was kind of I don't know what to call it, a slide, where dirt had kind of come down like a shallow gully. We allowed us to climb up to the top and get up on top of that little knob. And right in the dead center of that knob was a neat little 4 foot by 4 foot deep hole with a dirt piled neatly to one side where John Swift's cache that we were looking for had once resided. So, Bill, this is a story about the one that got away. And I will tell you that I found another one of his cache sites about a half a mile from that one, and it had this exact same little 4 foot by 4 foot deep square hole, and it was 6 feet out from a giant beech tree that had Masonic symbol, the compass and square of the Masons carved into the tree, and right above it was JS carved backwards. And when John Swift carved his initials, he always carved them backwards, so that would distinguish him from anybody else that had the initials JS. And that is the treasure story you get as a reward for your due diligence.
There you go, Bill. That's awesome. Good job. We got Spike. He's saying you need your own show, and I told him, I said that's something we're working on. Give us some time, and I think that'll happen. I agree with you, Spike. I do, and I approached Dorian about it, and I told him the same thing. I think you need your own show. So, do we even know what night that would be yet or anything?
Well, Mike, I think we were focusing on Wednesday.
Okay, that's what I thought. I was just curious if we're still thinking Wednesdays. So there you go. We don't know yet when it'll be. We still got a little bit of work to get there, but I do believe that will be coming. So anything else, Dorian?
Well, quite frankly, research is a big subject, and I think we've given the audience an awful lot to think about. And if somebody couldn't get some tips out of all of that, better check your pulse. I just a lot of good stuff. This is probably, in terms of actually helping your audience be successful, this is probably one of the most important shows that you and I have ever done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think so. I think we put some really good information out there, and folks, I'll tell you, it's my fault. Between the magazine and the website and the podcast, and sometimes I just get a little overwhelmed or a little bit, I'm not going to lie, I get a little burned out, and for a while I kind of don't put enough into it like I should. And but we're going to work hard to change that and make sure the shows are, worth your time to listen to. We're going to, this week we've been getting ready for a week for this show. And I would guess that, you've probably heard of some of them, but hopefully we brought some things up you hadn't thought of before, and that's our goal. We want to help people. Dorian and I both love helping people in the hobby and sharing our experience and our information with. So, yeah. Dorian, I'm absolutely beat. Let's call it a night, buddy.
All right.
I am beat. I'm tired. I'm wore out. These kids. These kids. If anybody'd like a kid, maybe we ought to do a contest to give him away for a day or two.
Oh.
Maybe that's why haven't I thought of that before? Give my little 2-year-old monster away for a day or a week. The grand prize could be you get him for a whole week. Yeah.
The problem is, Mike, you would have to award the prize at gunpoint.
Yeah. He's cute. He's a cute little fella, but I'll tell you what, a little bit of time around him and it's going to be no thanks. He's a handful, but thank you all for tuning in tonight. Hope you enjoyed the show, and everybody have a good night.
Good night, everyone.